Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this evening we'll be talking about another short discourse from the Buddha's teachings. So I'll start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll go through the teachings in this particular discourse, and then if there's any questions, I'll take them at the end. So please feel free to type in questions at any time. So we'll pay homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So this time we'll be looking at a discourse from the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 46, sutta number 23, which is here called the Tanya Sutta. So Tanya means basis or foundation. It's actually related to the word satipatthana. So the word thana literally means standing. What something stands on. So it's basis, it's foundation. So this particular discourse is talking about the basis for the 5 hindrances, and conversely, the basis for the 7 factors of awakening. So I'll read a bit from the sutta and talk about it, and we'll take it from there. So the sutta begins, this is presumably the Buddha speaking. The sutta begins, monks, when you frequently apply the mind to things that are grounds for sensual passion, interest in sensuality arises, and once arisen, it increases and grows. So this is the basic format that the Buddha is using here. So this first statement here, so he's saying when one frequently applies the mind, and applies the mind here is a translation from manasikara, which I actually think is a very good translation. So I'm reading here from Bhante Suddhāso's translation. So manasikara, it's commonly translated as attention, but that actually doesn't quite capture the meaning of this word. So manasi means in the mind, and kara means doing or making. So translating manasikara as applying the mind is actually very accurate, very precise. Like, how do you apply the mind? What are you doing with the mind? What are you making with the mind? So this is actually quite approve of this, applying the mind. Like, what are you doing with the mind? So when you frequently apply the mind to things that are the basis for kama raga. So the word kama means sensuality. And in the suttas, it's commonly in relationship to what's called the 5 kama guna. So that's pleasant experiences through the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. And it's interesting that when the Buddha is talking about the 5 aspects of sensuality, they're all physical. He doesn't mention the mind. Whereas when talking about sense restraint, he also includes the mind. But when talking about sensuality in particular, the Buddha normally emphasizes the 5 physical senses and doesn't mention the mind. But it should be understood, of course, that also directing attention towards sensual thoughts is still in the domain of sensuality. And it's relevant to the topic here. So it's saying whenever one applies the mind frequently to things which are the basis for sensual passion. So again, kama, sensuality, and raga means passion. So passion for sensuality. Then, well, what happens? If you're constantly directing the mind towards things that are connected to sensual passion, well, what happens? Well, naturally, you have more interest in sensuality, which is what the Buddha says here. So he says then kama chanda arises. So kama, again, sensuality, and chanda has the meaning of interest or enthusiasm, or zeal is one of the older translations, which I actually quite like for this word. but interest in sensuality. And the more that grows, then the more it tends to dominate the mind. So this is the first of the five hindrances, the five nivarana, which have a tendency to disturb our meditation and make it difficult to stay focused on our meditation practice and difficult to enter into deep concentration. So the Buddha's instruction here, it's actually not particularly complex. It's actually quite straightforward. He's just saying, we'll start looking at what is it that when you focus the mind on something, when you apply the mind towards something, it causes an increase in your interest in sensuality. So if you're constantly thinking about pleasant things that you want, then what's going to happen? Well, then you're going to get even more interested in those experiences. So it's actually not a particularly complex thing that he's talking about here. The mind, in the Dvaita Vitakka Sutta, the Buddha actually says quite directly, whatever one frequently thinks about becomes the inclination of the mind. So in other words, we're constantly building mental habits. If you spend your meditation thinking about how desperately you want to watch TV after the meditation, well, then what's going to happen? Well, you're just training your mind to be even more interested in watching TV. You're just training the mind to be even more obsessed with TV. So then what will happen is that over time, that will become increasingly dominant in the mind, because that's what we're training the mind to do. So it's observing, are we actually training the mind to have more sensual desire? Are we training the mind to be more interested in sensuality? And if so, well, maybe we should think about training the mind differently, training the mind to be less interested in sensuality. And he applies the same statement to the second hindrance, which is in Pali, vyapada. So vyapada has the meaning of aversion or negativity or ill will. So, of course, similarly, when we frequently apply the mind to things that are the grounds for aversion, negativity, then aversion arises and becomes stronger in the mind. So fixating on what we hate, fixating on what we dislike, fixating on what annoys us. Well, when we do that, then what happens? Well, then there's more aversion in the mind, naturally. We're training the mind to be more aversive. And similarly, when one frequently applies the mind to things that are the grounds for tina midda, translated here as dullness and drowsiness, which is actually, that's not bad. So this fogginess, this blurriness of mind. So tina midda, again, dullness and drowsiness. Yeah, it's this tendency of the mind to kind of drift in this vague, foggy, unclear state. So not necessarily sleepy, but rather blurry, cloudy, unclear. So then also considering, what is it that when we apply the mind to it, what is it that leads to an increase in this blurry, foggy, hazy state of mind? Conversely, what is it we can apply the mind to that leads to increased sharpness and precision of mind? So again, starting to pay attention to what we're doing with our mind and what effect it's having. So this is actually pointing to one of the critical underlying principles of Buddhist practice, which is examining the cause-effect relationship of every decision that we make with our mind, recognizing how we are shaping our mind with every mental action. So now, again, when you're having a lot of difficulty with dullness and blurriness during your meditation, well, ask yourself, what am I doing that's making the mind blurry and dull? It doesn't happen all by itself. There's something that we do in order to make the mind lean in that direction. So we need to start examining, what am I doing that's making the mind greedy, aversive, and dull? It's not happening by itself. It's the result of how we've been training the mind. And if we recognize what kind of training we're doing to the mind, then we can choose to train the mind in a different way. And similarly, the fourth hindrance, which in Pali is uddacha kukucha. So this is translated here as restlessness and remorse, which is, I mean, it's okay. Agitation, restlessness, yeah. Remorse is a translation of the word kukucha, which is relevant in other contexts, but here it's not irrelevant, but it's slightly off the point. So this is talking about that tendency of the mind to be constantly moving around. So it's more like unsettledness. So agitation and unsettledness. So the tendency of the mind to constantly want to just be in motion. So there's a desire element here, in that the mind wants to do something or wants to experience something. And there can also be an aversion element, in that the mind is just trying to avoid whatever is currently going on. And sometimes it's just that the mind is already accustomed to movement. So for example, if you've been moving the mind a lot all day long, and then you go to meditate, well, what's going to happen? Well, the mind's going to keep moving, of course. You've been thinking about a lot of things, you've been doing a lot of things with your mind, and so then when you go to meditate, then what happens? The mind keeps moving. That's what we've been training it to do. And then while we're meditating, what are we doing with the mind? And whatever we're doing with the mind, is it making the mind more peaceful, or is it making the mind more agitated? Is it making the mind more settled or more unsettled? An example of this is the fairly common practice of body scanning, of sweeping one's attention through the body. Well, for some people, at some times, that's a soothing activity which makes the mind more peaceful. And for other people, or at other times, it actually makes the mind more agitated and restless. So looking and seeing, what is the actual effect of whatever I'm doing? So not to just blindly apply a particular technique because a teacher told you to, or because a friend uses it, or even because it worked for you yesterday, but rather to be constantly examining, what is the actual effect of what I'm doing? Is it actually making the mind more peaceful and clear? Or is it making the mind more agitated and unsettled? And then the fifth hindrance, vicikicca. So the Buddha says, when you frequently apply the mind to things that are the basis for doubt, doubt arises, and once arisen, it increases and grows. So vicikicca, again, it means skepticism or doubt. This tendency in particular to skeptically doubt the practice that we're doing, or to be full of ruminations about whether or not the Dhamma is correct, or whether or not the Buddha was right, or whether or not this practice is worth doing, or whether or not it brings any real benefit, or and it's recognizing that as long as we're rolling around in these kinds of skeptical, doubting thoughts, then we're not actually practicing the Buddhist teachings, which means we can't actually find out whether or not they work. We can't find out whether or not they're true. It's only through actual experience that we can know for ourselves. And it's only through actual experience that these doubts evaporate. And also it's recognizing that when we pay attention to our experience, if we focus on certain aspects of our experience, then it might make the mind more confused, more uncertain. So vicikicca also has the meaning of uncertainty. Whereas if we focus on other aspects of our experience, then conversely, our faith and confidence in the Dhamma grows. For example, focusing on the progress we've made in our practice. We focus on that and we're like, oh, wow, the Dhamma works and I can do this. And faith and confidence grows. If instead we focus on the fact that we've been practicing for however long and the mind still has defilements, and we're still not really convinced about some particular details of the doctrine or whatever, well, If we just keep fixating on that, then the mind will just keep rolling around in its confusion and uncertainty and doubt. And then we just won't get anywhere in our practice. So it's recognizing that while there is undoubtedly, there is a place for examining our views, questioning our views, there's also a time for just setting aside doubt, setting aside uncertainty, and just focusing on what we can actually feel and experience right here and now. Focusing on cultivating this immediate present moment practice and observing the tangible results that come from doing this practice. And then the Buddha applies a similar set of investigations to be done with the 7 awakening factors. So the first one, he says, when you frequently apply the mind to things that are the basis for the awakening factor of mindfulness, then it arises, comes to full development. So this is starting on the list of the 7 bojjhanga. So bojjhanga means a factor of awakening factor, things which are aspects of the path to awakening, which are aspects of the awakened mind. And these 7 are sati, which we normally translate as mindfulness, dhamma vichaya, which means investigation of dhamma or analysis of dhamma, virya, which means energy or effort, piti, which means euphoria or ecstasy, passaddhi, which is tranquility, samadhi, which is concentration, and upekkha, equanimity. So again, with each of these things, the Buddha is encouraging us to really examine. So what is the basis for the arising and increase of mindfulness, for example? How can we apply the mind in such a way that mindfulness increases? How can we apply the mind in such a way that a wise examination of experience increases? Dhamma vichaya. How can we apply the mind in a way such that this heroic resolve increases in the mind? So virya, this heroic resolve to do what needs to be done in order to bring the mind towards awakening. How can we apply the mind so that that heroic resolve increases and becomes stronger and reaches its full pinnacle of development? How can we apply the mind such that the mind becomes joyful, blissful, such that our experience of the body and mind is a predominantly pleasant one? So increasing the factor of piti, euphoria or ecstasy. How can we apply the mind such that the mind becomes tranquil and peaceful? Passaddhi. How can we apply the mind that leads to it becoming concentrated, unified, settled, and stable? Samadhi. And how can we train the mind to be non-reactive, to be equanimous, to be content? So cultivating the factor of upekkha, equanimity. So what's interesting about this particular discourse is that the Buddha doesn't actually answer these questions for us. He doesn't tell us, these are the grounds for desire, aversion, dullness, restlessness, and doubt. He doesn't say, these are the grounds for mindfulness, examination, resolve, and so on. But rather, he's telling us to investigate our own experience, see what we're doing with our mind, and when do these different aspects of the mind arise? Based upon what applications of mind do we experience an increase in one of the hindrances, or conversely, an increase in one of the factors of awakening? So here the Buddha is actually encouraging us to figure it out for ourselves through observing the cause and effect process of mind training, and recognizing that mind training is something which happens in every single waking moment. In every single waking moment, we're applying the mind in some way. And that application of mind might be increasing our hindrances, or it might be increasing our awakening factors. And so the Buddha is saying that we should be constantly examining and seeing for ourselves what we can do that will reduce our hindrances and increase our awakening factors. So that's what we have in this sutta. Actually really beautiful and succinct discourse. And I see there's already a few questions online. So I think I'll go ahead and start responding to questions and take the conversation from there. So hello to all the people joining in online. Hello to Suzanne, Karuna, Sleep Doc, Philip, Bhumika, Dharma Learner, Vivian, Sud, Siripala, Philip, and Mary, and everyone else who's watching online. Good to see all of you. And we have a question here from Sud. Sud says, sensual desires, laziness. That's kind of an odd translation for Tina Midda. I'm not quite on board with that. Sensual desire, laziness, and the other 5 hindrances follow patterns in the mind that are almost ritualistic. Is this what the Buddha means by silabhata paramasa that should be given up? I don't understand what you mean by ritualistic about the 5 hindrances. Yeah, I don't understand what you mean. Maybe if you could clarify what you mean when you say ritualistic. But I personally, I don't think this really has anything to do with silabhata paramasa. The only one of these that seems to have much connection would be the 5th one, which is the hindrance of uncertainty. So silabhata paramasa, properly speaking, means a misunderstanding of spiritual practices, a wrong grasp of spiritual practices. So, for example, grasping at the form, the external form, rather than the purpose of that form. An example of this is people who think you need to meditate in the full lotus position. It's like, well, is the full lotus position helpful? Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is helpful. But it's not the essence of meditation practice. The essence of meditation practice is the training of the mind in wholesome states. So just sitting in the full lotus position isn't going to make that happen. It's a good position for meditation, but just sitting in the full lotus position isn't going to make the mind full of wholesome states. So silabhata paramasa would be, in this example, is fixating on the external form while completely missing out on the essence of the practice, what the practice is actually trying to achieve. Or bowing to a Buddha statue. Bowing to a Buddha statue does not lead to enlightenment. As a physical activity, it's completely meaningless. However, bowing to a Buddha statue can be used as a way of cultivating a deep respect and appreciation for the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And therefore, it's useful. The activity itself is not what's important, but it's the cultivation of mind, which one is doing as a result or as a accompaniment to that physical action. That's what's important. So silabhata paramasa is where one doesn't understand the actual purpose of spiritual practices and one latches on their external form, or one misunderstands how to correctly use those forms. So I don't actually see that as having much relation to the 5 hindrances, except, again, maybe in the case of the 5th one, the uncertainty. But maybe if you have something more on this. Okay, so Sud has a follow-up. He says, we fall into acting into patterns and grasp at these patterns and play them out, always craving for cake results, in thinking it will satisfy and hence fall into this pattern of eating every time. Almost like a ritual, thinking that these rituals might satisfy us when they do not. Perhaps I thought a stream mentor wouldn't buy into it, hence freeing themselves of suffering. Okay, I think I get what you're saying. So for example, someone who thinks, oh, if I eat cake, then I will be happy. So then the mind has, yeah, I see your point. So having a ritual of doing activities which we think will bring happiness, but which ultimately don't. So, for example, indulgence in junk food seems to be one example you're giving here. Or the aversive mind, which is just trying to eliminate everything irritating or unpleasant from one's life, which just winds up in being irritated all the time, speaking from personal experience here. So yeah, I get what you're saying. There's a certain relationship here. So it's what you're talking about, though, is a much more basic animalistic surface level problem, whereas Silabhata Paramasa is something a little bit deeper. It's when somebody has some kind of spiritual practice, but they're missing the essence of that practice. They're just latching onto the surface level of it. Yeah, and a stream mentor, interestingly enough, is not necessarily free of desire and aversion, but they would likely have significantly reduced their desire and aversion because of this recognition that pursuing these activities doesn't inherently bring one peace or happiness or joy. Again, let me know if I've actually answered your question. I'm still not quite clear that I'm understanding what you're getting at. And Philip says, any specific advice for self-doubt, which is including being able to clearly see cause and effect? Yeah, pay attention to whatever progress you've made in your practice. Generally speaking, anyone who's been practicing Buddhism for at least a few weeks, you can see some kind of improvement, some kind of benefit, which means that you are capable of practicing Buddhism. So you're capable of getting results. So pay attention to that. Rather than fixating on what you haven't been able to do or what's still difficult for you, instead pay attention to whatever progress you've made. It doesn't matter how slight it is, because as long as you've started to move in the right direction, then you know that you're capable of moving in the right direction. And that's what's really important. And this gets easier over time. So as you make more progress in the path, then it becomes easier to recognize and acknowledge that progress. Another important thing to keep in mind, by the way, is that one of the basic principles of Buddhism is that every single person has exactly the same capacity for awakening. So nobody is unique. So nobody is uniquely incapable of attaining awakening. So where does the self-centered idea come from that somehow I am different from everybody else and that I am the only one who can't attain awakening? What is this? It's actually just another form of self-centeredness. It's just another form of self-identity. So also recognizing that, like, oh, that's just another form of self-centeredness, just another form of self-identity. And it's one which is particularly unhelpful. Actually, much better would be to have the arrogance of thinking like, I'm great at this whole enlightenment thing. I'm going to nail this in like a year, tops. It's like, well, great. Then with that kind of attitude, you're going to practice with enthusiasm. And after a year, when you're still not enlightened, you'll be like, well, turns out it's taking a bit longer than I thought, but I can still do this because I'm the best. Well, okay, great, keep going. And as you keep going, then that arrogance will gradually erode. And eventually one will attain awakening. But with starting from the position of self-doubt, well, actually just keep practicing. You might think, I can't do this, I'm no good at this. Well, keep practicing anyway. And pay attention to the results. And you'll notice, oh, actually, this is working. I am getting somewhere. This is bringing benefits. Maybe not very quickly, but traditionally we say it took the Buddha 500 lifetimes. So what makes you think you're going to get it in a few years even? This practice takes a long time. So we don't expect to make particularly quick strides. It takes a while. Louisa asked, whose translation are you reading from? I was reading from Bhante Suddhāso's translation from Sutta Central, mainly just because somebody else set up the sutta reader for me, and it was on Bhante Suddhāso's translation. But they're decent translations, and they're freely available online. So that's actually a huge gift to the world, which we can be very grateful for. So John says, I believe I've been pushing my mind too much recently. There was a lot of tension. So today I tried to loosen the mind without clinging to things. Could non-application of mind in this way be a condition for the awakening factors as well? It went well, that's why I asked. Well, if it went well, then that means it worked, which means it was good. So that's actually the point the Buddha's making in this discourse, is he's saying that it's not necessarily that there's one correct answer for every person in every situation, but rather that we should observe what we're doing and to see what effect it's having, whether it's having good effects or bad effects. And yes, sometimes we need to just relax, like stop trying to do anything. Just be lazy, just like slump on your cushion, like forget even about good posture, just like let yourself slump there and like forget about even trying to meditate. It's like, I'm just going to slump here and do nothing until the bell rings. Well, sometimes when you do that, then the mind just naturally drops into a sharp, clear state of samadhi. Sometimes that's actually exactly what the mind needs. And other times, if you do that, then you're just going to fall asleep and start daydreaming. Other times, you actually need to be like, no, I am doing this, like, and just really go at it full on military style. Sometimes that's actually what's needed. But it's developing this awareness of what are the actual conditions of our mind, how do our decisions affect the mind, and we start to become aware of what is going to be helpful or relevant under different situations. So under this particular situation, yeah, it sounds like relaxing was a good option. And another situation, it might not be. So we need to develop that self-awareness and that willingness to be flexible and adaptable and to do what's helpful under each circumstance. And Haiyang says, how do we handle our doubts regarding our practice when we are not progressing towards being more mindful in our daily activities? Well, first off, ask yourself if there's something you're doing that's making it particularly difficult. So often it's something like addiction to music, addiction to watching shows, or addiction to reading novels, or addiction to pointless arguments, or there's something in your life that's making your mind unstable and blurry. So ask yourself, am I doing something that is contributing to the blurriness and instability of the mind? And if so, reduce that and do less of it. Try to cut it out entirely if possible, but a bare minimum, try to reduce it. So actually, often a useful approach to practice is, instead of asking, what can I do to improve my practice? Instead, ask, what am I doing that's damaging my practice? And stop doing that. Because actually Buddhist practice is very straightforward. It's not complicated. The main problem is that we're constantly sabotaging ourselves. So start asking yourself, what am I doing that is sabotaging my practice? And how can I reduce that from my life? And then you might start to notice you're making progress again. And of course, also the usual things, do lots of meditation every day, follow the 8 precepts, focus on your body all day long, like all the usual stuff, of course, that too. And that's the last question online. Are there any questions from the audience here at the monastery? Nope. Nope, nothing. Okay. Okay, so we'll conclude the session at this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.